Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Trey Gowdy, and it's Sunday night in America. The political graveyard is full of people who promise to reduce the size and scope of government. Yet it rarely, if ever, happened. In Washington's political lexicon, merely slowing the rate of growth is considered a cut. But now, President Trump is directly taking on the government, employing the aid of Elon Musk. Democrats are outraged, which is somewhat surprising considering their admiration for billionaires like Michael Bloomberg, George Soros, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates, who have long played influential roles in shaping policy. But now, they ask, who is this unelected billionaire? Elon Musk, who dares to dismantle federal agencies, fire employees, transfer them, offer early retirements, and implement sweeping reforms, all without congressional review? At this very moment, they claim an unelected, unaccountable billionaire is raiding our government. Instead of raising the alarm, the Oversight Committee is running cover while President Trump strips the bureaucracy for parts. Our federal government, they say, is being fleeced by a handful of billionaires at the expense of everyday Americans. It feels as if some have simply surrendered their constitutional duty and handed it over to someone unelected. But let's clarify one point. Elon Musk has no power aside from what President Trump allows. Bottom line, they say, trust Elon. Well, he's not gaining anything from this effort. In fact, I wonder how he finds the time, given how dedicated he is. But I told him, go to the Department of Education. You're going to find the same issues there. Then, I'll tell him to check the military. Let's go through the Pentagon. We're going to find billions, hundreds of billions, of dollars wasted on fraud and abuse. And guess what? The American people elected me on that promise. Now, I hate to ruin the Time magazine cover, but Donald Trump is the President of the United States, not Elon Musk. Voters elected Trump, and Trump enlisted the aid of Elon Musk. It's no different than when Barack Obama hired lawyer Ron Klain to manage the Ebola crisis, except back then, the media didn't seem to care. Where is this heading? Are we talking about cutting discretionary spending? Or is everything on the table? James Comer, representing the Bluegrass State in Congress and chairing the Oversight Committee, joins us now. Welcome, Chairman. I have to admit, I find it amusing to hear the left complain about unelected people holding power. Considering they practically described the entire fourth branch of government, the administrative or regulatory state. Comer responded, that's exactly the hill they've chosen to die on, defending the bureaucracy. But that's precisely what DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, is about. President Trump campaigned on this issue and received a clear mandate from the American people in November. The American people voted to dismantle the bloated bureaucracy that was never supposed to be a fourth branch of government. What we're seeing now is Elon Musk advising Donald Trump, with Trump taking most of his advice, but not all. Meanwhile, in Congress, our House Oversight Committee, your old stomping grounds, Trey, is working closely with Musk and DOGE. We want to save taxpayers' money, eliminate burdensome and unnecessary regulations, bring common sense back to the federal government, and reduce wasteful spending. It's working, and the Democrats have completely lost their minds. All right, Chairman, people crave power. Let's listen to an example and then discuss it. A lot of bureaucrats were beholden to the previous administration, the Obama administration. The vast majority had voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Some did what they were told. But there was also a resistance element. I sat in a meeting where they discussed how U.S. foreign aid was flowing into Syria, and they needed to hide it from the White House. They didn't want President Trump finding out and cutting it off. Chairman, we now have nameless, faceless bureaucrats actively working against the duly elected president. To my knowledge, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, no one at USAID has ever been elected to anything. You're absolutely right, Trey, as you always are, Comer replied. Democrats are complaining about Elon Musk being an unelected bureaucrat. But here's the difference, Elon Musk is transparent. He tweets multiple times an hour, sharing what he's thinking, what he's working on, what he's discovering, and what reforms he hopes to implement. He is open with Congress, President Trump, and most importantly, the American people. At the end of the day, it only matters what President Trump wants because Musk is simply an advisor. Contrast that with the Democrats defending unelected bureaucrats, career officials running agencies like USAID who have never been held accountable. These agencies have received blank checks for years, spending money however they please. They've tried to Trump-proof government institutions, working against the will of the American people. But Americans elected President Trump to drain the swamp. And that's exactly what he's doing, with Musk's help. You're going to see a Republican Congress working together with President Trump and Musk to finally get the backs of the American taxpayers. For those worried that Elon Musk or anyone else is usurping executive or legislative authority, I assume, as chairman of the Oversight Committee, a powerful committee, you're keeping a close eye on things. People don't need to worry about anyone running around unchecked, right? We're watching closely. We're following Musk's transparency. Compare that to George Soros, Bloomberg, or the other billionaires funding the Democratic machine. They operate in secret, behind closed doors, with dark money organizations attacking Republicans and obstructing oversight. Musk, on the other hand, is operating openly. Will he always be right? No. Some of his ideas may not work, but the majority of what he's doing aligns with what the American people want. And he'll have the support of a cooperative Republican Congress, focused on saving money and restoring common sense to government. Chairman James Comer from the great state of Kentucky. Thank you for your service to our country and for joining us on Sunday night. Thanks, Trey. A majority of Americans support cutting foreign aid. But where does your tax money actually go? What are these agencies doing with it? And what should be on the chopping block? Ben Dominic, editor-at-large for The Spectator and Fox News contributor, joins us next to discuss how your tax dollars are being spent and wasted. Elon Musk is simply an advisor to President Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Democrats are defending unelected bureaucrats, individuals who have been in charge of various government agencies, including USAID, without ever being held accountable. These agencies have operated without oversight, receiving blank checks and spending taxpayer money however they please. Donald Trump is the President of the United States. The bureaucrats knew this, and yet they have actively worked to Trump-proof government agencies to counteract the will of the American people. However, the people have spoken, and their will is clear. They want Trump to go in and drain the swamp. That is precisely what he is doing. With Elon Musk assisting him, you will see a Republican Congress working alongside Musk and President Trump to finally stand up for American taxpayers. For those concerned that Elon Musk or anyone else is usurping executive or legislative authority, let's be clear. As chairman of the Oversight Committee, one of the most powerful committees in Congress, I assume you are ensuring that everything stays within the proper guardrails. There's no need to worry about people running around unchecked. You're leading a critical oversight effort, and I'm sure you're watching closely. We are watching him very closely. Chairman James Comer responded. We're following him on Twitter, where he is completely transparent. Compare that to individuals like George Soros, Michael Bloomberg, or others who have had a massive influence on the Democrat Party. They operate behind closed doors, without transparency, making backroom deals. Soros, for instance, funnels money into dark money organizations that attack Republicans and obstruct oversight. In contrast, Elon Musk is being completely transparent. And I believe the American people appreciate that. Is he always going to be right? No. Some of his ideas won't work. But the overwhelming majority of what he's discussing aligns with what the American people want to see. He will have a cooperative Republican Congress working with him to cut wasteful spending and restore common sense to our government. Chairman James Comer, from the great state of Kentucky. Thank you for your service to our country and for joining us this Sunday night. We'll see you again soon. Thanks, Trey. A majority of Americans support cuts to foreign aid. But where exactly is your tax money going? What are these agencies doing with it? And what should be on the chopping block? Joining us now is Ben Dominic, editor-at-large for The Spectator and a Fox News contributor. Welcome, Ben. Thank you for joining us. Ben, who is the largest beneficiary of U.S. foreign aid? I believe it used to be Israel. Is that still the case? Well, technically, yes, it's still Israel, primarily due to the significant military aid we provide them. However, let's step back from the numbers and examine the broader approach that USAID, the Agency for International Development, has been using. Dominic explained. Trey, They go into different countries around the world and attempt to influence governments in ways that, if foreign nations did the same to us, we'd find absolutely unacceptable. Essentially, they airdrop money into these countries and use it to bribe local officials into implementing social and cultural policies that align with the priorities of U.S. diplomats and State Department bureaucrats. Not necessarily the values of the country receiving the aid. You and I are both familiar with government waste when it comes to infrastructure projects, bridges to nowhere. Unnecessary highways, but this is worse. This is wasteful spending specifically aimed at manipulating foreign cultures, including advancing radical social agendas, like LGBT propaganda, all at the expense of the American taxpayer. Unfortunately, this has been going on for a long time. It ramped up significantly during the Bush administration, expanded under Obama, and continued into the first Trump term, although there wasn't enough time to fully address it. But now, Trump is tackling it head-on, cutting off funding to these programs and reasserting control over how American taxpayer dollars are spent. All right, Ben, you know that lawyers love to play the devil's advocate. So let me phrase this another way, and you tell me where I'm wrong. Part of foreign aid is intended to provide humanitarian assistance, but another part is designed to counteract the influence of foreign adversaries, namely Russia and China. Supporters of foreign aid argue that if we don't engage in these regions, our enemies will. But my response is simple. You don't have to pay countries to hate you. They'll do it for free. What do you make of that argument? Well, one of the most important aspects of foreign aid, Dominic said, is ensuring that it actually benefits the people of those regions in ways that promote stability. The goal should be to foster security and development, thereby reducing the necessity for an American military footprint. We saw this in certain African nations where U.S.-funded projects did improve stability and help counteract the spread of terrorism. However, much of USAID's spending today is not focused on stabilizing these nations. It's focused on advancing ideological agendas that often run counter to the values of the people in these countries. Meanwhile, adversaries like China and Russia have a different approach. They don't waste money pushing social engineering projects. Instead, they build roads, bridges, and other infrastructure, expecting control and influence in return. So yes, foreign aid has a strategic component. But USAID has strayed far from its original purpose. It has become a tool for the State Department to reshape foreign cultures according to American leftist ideology, rather than serving its original mission of providing essential assistance where it is most needed. One last question. Ben, if the primary force of disruption in the Middle East is Iran, and they are openly threatening U.S. government officials, including our president, why not pursue regime change there? Well, Trey, the first thing we need to do is support the Iranian people because they are the first victims of their government. The Iranian regime uses its resources to fund terrorism across the region and suppress its own citizens. Toppling that regime is ultimately a question for the Iranian people themselves. But we can do plenty to weaken it. We need to cut off its economic lifelines. That means strict sanctions, especially on energy exports, and enforcing secondary sanctions on insurance companies and shipping firms that enable Iran's economy. We did this effectively during the first Trump administration. But under Biden, enforcement was lax. Now, with Trump back in office, expect a return to the policies that actually worked. Challenging but necessary conversations about the Middle East. Ambassador Nathan Sales, thank you for your service to our country and for joining us on Sunday night. Thanks, Trey. Coming up next, should we be prioritizing aid to foreign nations? Or should we be focusing on our own country first? We'll discuss that after the break. When it comes to foreign aid, the priority should be ensuring that it actually benefits the people of the regions receiving assistance. The goal should be to promote stability and reduce the need for an American military presence in areas where we might otherwise have to deploy troops. We saw this approach during various programs launched under President Bush and others, which significantly increased the stability of several nations. Particularly in Africa, these programs helped people while also strengthening regimes that were at risk of falling into chaos and terrorism. However, countries like China and Russia have their own interests in these regions as well. They take a different approach. They don't waste resources on ideological projects. Instead, they build roads, invest in infrastructure, and provide financial aid. expecting political control in return. Their strategy is simple: they buy influence. That's not something we can ignore or leave unchallenged. One thing that is abundantly clear is that USAID has not been operating in the best interests of the American people for a very long time. The agency has strayed from its original mission and has become a tool for pushing a radical ideological agenda. It prioritizes advancing progressive causes and State Department bureaucratic interests over meaningful humanitarian assistance. That's why it's a positive step for the Trump administration to investigate and reform the agency. This is not a job for unaccountable bureaucrats. It should fall under the authority of the Secretary of State. If we are going to spend taxpayer dollars, they need to be spent wisely and under proper oversight. Ben Dominick, editor-at-large for The Spectator and a Fox News contributor, weighed in on this issue. I cannot think of a single USAID employee who was elected by the American people. Not one. If I'm wrong, someone can text me and correct me. But as far as I know, these people hold tremendous power without any direct accountability. He said, "Thank you for joining us on this Sunday night. Ben, I'll see you soon." Yes, sir, you too. Coming up next. A real estate expert once told me, water is magic. Well, there's a lot of waterfront property in Gaza. Will there be any magic there? That's next. Welcome back to Sunday Night in America. Gaza is a land of both natural beauty and deep turmoil. Largely due to the depravity of Hamas, the Palestinian people there are, for the most part, unwanted by neighboring Arab countries. Meanwhile, Israel has been repeatedly victimized by terrorism originating from Gaza, and thus has a vested security interest in determining who takes control of the region. One proposed idea is to allow Palestinians who wish to leave to do so. What's wrong with that? People should have the right to relocate and return later if they choose. It's a compelling idea that should be examined, pursued, and implemented because it has the potential to create a better future for everyone involved. President Trump has ideas. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ideas. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has ideas. The King of Jordan, whom President Trump is scheduled to meet tomorrow, also has ideas. Hostilities in this region go back thousands of years. Right now, the primary force driving conflict is Iran. And President Trump has been crystal clear about his position on Iran's nuclear ambitions. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. I'm not putting restrictions. I'm not negotiating. They cannot have it. And if I think they are moving toward developing one, despite what I just said, that will be very unfortunate for them. During his first term, Trump brokered the historic Abraham Accords, something most people believed was impossible. But can he bring lasting peace to the Middle East? Joining us tonight is Nathan Sales, former acting undersecretary, ambassador at large, and counter-terrorism expert. Welcome, Ambassador. In your judgment, who should control Gaza in the short term? And who should control it in the long term? If the answers are different, please explain. Hey, Trey. Well, the easy answer is to start with who should not control Gaza, and that's Hamas. Sales replied, Hamas controlling Gaza has been a disaster. Not just for Israel, which has suffered endless terrorism at their hands, but also for the Palestinian people. Hamas doesn't care about governance, building roads, hospitals, or ensuring basic necessities. They care about one thing: killing as many Jews as possible. So, first and foremost, Hamas must be destroyed. They can have no role whatsoever in the future governance of Gaza. Here's a statement from the Secretary of Defense. Ultimately, all options are on the table because we are not going to limit ourselves by outlining exactly what we would or would not do in this particular context. The key to understanding this issue is recognizing a fundamental truth. The definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again while expecting different results. And in Gaza, for decades, the world has attempted the same failed approach. The belief has been that if we just tweak Hamas a little bit, or try a slightly different Palestinian Authority, or remove certain elements and renegotiate, the outcome will somehow change. Conventional wisdom suggested that Saudi Arabia or another Arab nation with good relations with Israel might step in. But sending U.S. troops into Gaza just after pulling them out of Afghanistan? That seems highly unlikely. Do you believe the U.S. is seriously considering sending troops to Gaza to maintain order? I asked. Sales responded, Trey, We need to hear more from the White House. What we do know is this. The U.S. does not have a strong track record when it comes to nation building in the Middle East. We saw the failures of Afghanistan and Iraq. Taking on another massive responsibility in Gaza would be a dangerous move. But at the same time, he continued, the past 50 years of simply crossing our fingers and hoping for peace has not worked. The people of Gaza and the West Bank need to be de-radicalized. They need to be freed from the propaganda that has driven them to hate Israel and reject its right to exist. Once that happens, real negotiations become possible, but simply hoping for the best, as we've done for decades, is not a viable solution. Let me ask a somewhat provocative question. I said, if Iran is truly the primary force of disruption in the region, and they are actively threatening U.S. government officials, including our president, why not pursue regime change there? Sales replied, the first step is maximum support for the Iranian people, who are the first victims of their government. At the same time, we need to apply maximum pressure on the regime. We may not need American boots on the ground, but we do need to delegitimize the Iranian government, cut off its economic resources, and ensure it cannot fund terrorism. Challenging but necessary discussions on the Middle East. Ambassador Nathan Sales, thank you for your service and for joining us on this Sunday night. Thanks, Trey. In the short term, what should be done? We all agree that Hamas should have no role whatsoever. Eradicating them is the only viable option. But is the U.S. seriously considering going into Gaza to maintain order? Well, Trey, that's a great question. The ambassador responded. We need to hear more from the White House about what the president has in mind. We do know a couple of things. First, the United States does not have the greatest track record when it comes to nation building in the Middle East. After seeing the failures of our efforts in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's unclear whether we should take on that responsibility again. This remains an open question. He continued, we need to be very cautious about sending American forces or construction workers into Gaza, where they would have a huge target on their backs. But one thing is certain, 50 years of crossing our fingers and hoping for the best has not produced better outcomes for either the Israelis or the Palestinians. We have to consider bold new approaches. Simply hoping that negotiations will eventually lead to peace isn't going to cut it. What needs to happen is the people of Gaza and the West Bank must be de-radicalized. They need to be deprogrammed from the propaganda that has driven them to hate Israel and deny its right to exist. If we can fix that, real negotiations become possible, and when that happens, lasting peace can follow. But simply repeating the same mistakes for decades is not a solution. All right, Trey continued, let me ask a somewhat provocative question. If Iran is indeed the major force of disruption in the region and is actively threatening to assassinate U.S. government officials, including our president, why not pursue regime change there? Well, the ambassador replied, what we need to do is provide maximum support to the Iranian people, who are, let's be clear, the first victims of the Iranian regime. At the same time, we must apply maximum pressure on that regime. Toppling it is ultimately a question for the Iranian people themselves. But we can help. We can help delegitimize the regime. We can take away its economic resources it uses to fund terrorism around the world and suppress its own people at home. I don't think we're going to see American boots on the ground in Tehran. I don't think that's necessary. But what has to happen, and we heard this from the president himself, is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon under any circumstances. So, he continued, we need to deny the regime the resources it uses to fund terrorism and support its nuclear ambitions. That means squeezing its energy exports. That means imposing secondary sanctions on insurance companies or shipping companies that move Iranian oil. We did this to great effect during the first Trump administration. The Biden administration, however, looked the other way on sanctions enforcement. But now, the old sheriff is back in town, and it's time to go back to the playbook that actually works. These are challenging but essential issues in the Middle East. Ambassador Nathan Sales, thank you for your service to our country and for joining us on a Sunday night. Thanks, Trey. Up next, immigration enforcement under President Trump. A man who has spent 34 years deporting illegal aliens has a message for the millions of illegal immigrants that Joe Biden released into our country in violation of federal law. You better start packing now. We're going to run this deportation operation in these sanctuary cities. They can help, or they can get out of the way, because we're coming. And we're going to do it. They're not going to stop it. Not for any mayor or governor who doesn't want public safety threats removed from their communities. I find it hard to believe that they would oppose us. But we're going to do it, with or without them. If they're not going to help, they need to step aside. Welcome back to Sunday Night in America. That was crystal clear. Either get in line or get your lawyer on the line. The Trump administration is done with so-called sanctuary city leaders, nearly all of whom are Democrats. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson are now being sued over their unwavering commitment to protecting criminal immigrants who are unlawfully present in the United States. Pritzker responded, "Unlike Donald Trump, we follow the law in Illinois. Now, maybe they put up with this kind of garbage in Florida. But in Illinois, we have grit, we are tough, we are strong, and Donald Trump has no idea what he's up against when he attacks Illinois." What this administration is attempting to do is get us to surrender our humanity. We're not going to do that in Chicago. So let's go back to Civics 101. Border security, immigration, and naturalization are uniquely federal responsibilities. We do not have 50 different border policies. We have one, and it is not determined by governors. It is not determined by mayors. Ambitious governors and mayors are trying to fight the Trump administration to raise their own political profiles, but they are going to lose. And they are going to lose a lot of money in the process. South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson understands the roles of state and federal government. He is also defending President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. He joins us now. Welcome, Mr. Attorney General. Thank you for being here. This issue, immigration, naturalization, and the border, is a federal matter. States can assist, but they cannot obstruct, correct? No doubt about it, Trey. Wilson replied. It is a federal crime to conceal, harbor, shield, or encourage someone to do those things when a federal officer is attempting to enforce the law. And yet, that's exactly what some of these sanctuary city leaders are doing. What's interesting to me, he continued, is that when the Biden and Obama administrations were in power, they sued states for trying to pass common-sense immigration laws that supported federal law. But now, with Donald Trump in office, these blue state mayors and governors are actively trying to prevent the administration from enforcing federal law. The reason we're in this situation, Wilson explained, the reason we have hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens in the country, many of whom are violent criminals, is because the federal government under the Democrats has refused to enforce immigration law. And worse, they've actively tried to stop Republican-led states from implementing reasonable policies that complement federal law. And that's why we're in this mess. Trying to apprehend an illegal alien is a federal responsibility. Yet there are people actively engaging in conduct that obstructs law enforcement. What's interesting is that when the Biden and Obama administrations were in power, they sued states for trying to pass common-sense immigration laws that supported and complemented federal law. However, when Donald Trump took office, he had to deal with blue state mayors and governors who actively tried to prevent his administration from enforcing those same federal laws. The reason we are in this situation, the reason tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, of illegal aliens have flooded into the country, is simple. The federal government under Democratic leadership has refused to enforce existing laws. Many of these individuals are criminals. Many of them are violent. Some have even killed American citizens. And instead of addressing the crisis, Democratic officials have also worked to prevent Republican-led states from implementing reasonable, legal policies that would help contain the chaos. Now, the issue of birthright citizenship is likely heading back to the Supreme Court. You and I were just kids back in the 1890s when that case was first decided. What do you expect to happen this time? Well, the Attorney General replied, this is definitely going to the U.S. Supreme Court. When the 14th Amendment was passed in the 1860s, it was intended to grant citizenship to emancipated slaves. It was not intended to confer automatic citizenship to the children of diplomats or to children of individuals who were not lawfully present in the country. The 14th Amendment requires two key conditions. One must be born or naturalized in the United States and be subject to its jurisdiction. When the drafters of the amendment wrote it, they did not intend for someone to enter the country illegally, whether that be ISIS members, MS-13 gang members, or anyone else. and then use the birth of a child to establish legal residency. So, I believe the Supreme Court will take a closer look at the 14th Amendment in light of its historical context. Just as they have done with many other laws, I'm hopeful that they will overturn this absurd interpretation, which has long incentivized illegal immigration. Speaking of the Supreme Court, that's actually where I first met Pam Bondi. You introduced us at a hearing. I don't think she's bluffing. I think states and cities that are playing games with criminal aliens are going to lose a lot of money. Now, that's not an issue for South Carolina, but it is for Illinois. Well, Wilson responded, I worked with Pam Bondi for 8 long years. For those who doubt her, for those who don't believe she will back up her words with action, just wait. America is about to learn what I've known for the past 15 years. I could not be more pleased to see you're leading the Department of Justice. And with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, alongside people like Tom Homan, I truly believe we are going to see real reform at the border. I'm prepared to fully support President Trump and Attorney General Bondi in their efforts to secure our borders and restore the rule of law. I also saw you at Kash Patel's confirmation hearing. You know more people in the cabinet than I do now. Alan Wilson, Attorney General of South Carolina. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday night. You also serve in uniform. And for that, I thank you for your service to our country. Thank you, Trey. An eye for an eye or the golden rule? Which one will prevail? She's going to restore fair, equal, and impartial justice and uphold the constitutional rule of law in America. I think she's going to be as impartial as a person can be. She will end the weaponization of federal law enforcement and restore honesty and integrity at the DOJ and the FBI. Welcome back to Sunday Night in America. There's a quote often attributed to Gandhi, though there is no evidence he actually said it. An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. Louisiana Senator John Kennedy recently rephrased it, saying, 2 wrongs make it even, but it doesn't make it right. That is the challenge now facing Trump's Justice Department officials. Do they meet injustice with injustice? Or is the true remedy for past abuses a renewed commitment to fairness? Pam Bondi now leads the Department of Justice. John Ratcliffe, a former federal prosecutor, is taking over at the CIA. Kash Patel, who has served both as a federal prosecutor and as a federal public defender, is soon to take the helm of the FBI. What will change? How do we get politics out of our justice and intelligence communities? Joining us is House Judiciary Committee member and former Judge Laurel Lee. Welcome, Congresswoman. Thank you for being with us. If memory serves, Pam Bondi once hired a political opponent in Florida because she believed that person would advance the cause of justice. That is rare. I think Americans would like to see more of that. That's right, Trey. Lee responded. That is the Pam Bondi we know in Florida. As our Attorney General, she was committed to integrity, fairness, and upholding the law. She fought hard on consumer protection, the fight against human trafficking, and the protection of the elderly. And what you just touched on is so important. We are at a moment in history where we must restore confidence in the Department of Justice and the FBI. Despite all the weaponization of the justice system against President Trump, he has made it clear that his commitment is to fairness and impartiality. That is the only way to restore trust in our institutions. You mentioned the FBI. Let's listen to some Democrats and their view on Kash Patel. Then, you and I will tell viewers the truth about him. Clip plays of Democratic leaders attacking Patel's nomination. The FBI is suffering in the eyes of the public. I noted, and I found it ironic to see Adam Schiff questioning Kash Patel. Given that Schiff is one of the most politically biased figures in Washington, Patel treated Schiff with a lot more fairness than Schiff ever treated Patel. What do you make of his nomination? Well, Lee answered, Patel has extensive security experience. He will shift the focus of the FBI away from Washington bureaucracy and back to field offices across America. He has made it clear that he wants law enforcement officers to focus on fighting crime, not politics. He is also committed to transparency and depoliticizing the FBI. These are precisely the kind of attributes we need in a director. And I think he and Pam Bondi will ensure that these agencies are dedicated to fairness, equality, and justice under the law. You were a judge, I continued. A judge must show restraint, impartiality, and humility. I think Senator Kennedy was right. Human nature is to repay injustice with injustice. But our system is designed to restrain human nature, not unleash it. How do we get back to fairness as a universal virtue? That's the core mission of our justice system. Lee replied, fairness and impartiality are the foundations of law. If people believe that similar cases will be treated similarly, they will trust the system. That is why President Trump and his nominees have repeatedly emphasized not retribution, but fairness. And that is what America deserves. Laurel Lee, you were a great judge and an effective member of the House of Representatives. Florida is lucky to have you. Thank you for joining us. That's right, Trey. And that's the Pam Bondi we know in Florida. As our Attorney General, she was committed to integrity, fairness, and upholding the law. She fought the hard battles, defending consumers, protecting the elderly, and combating human trafficking. And what you touched on is so important. We are at a critical moment where we need to restore confidence in the Department of Justice and the FBI. President Trump and Attorney General Bondi, despite the intense weaponization of the justice system against him, remain committed to fairness and impartiality. That is how we return to the core mission of the Department of Justice and rebuild trust in our institutions moving forward. Alright, you mentioned the Bureau. Let's take a moment to hear what some Democrats are saying about Kash Patel. Then, you and I can share the truth about him. Clip plays of Democratic leaders criticizing Patel's nomination. Kash Patel has no business being the director of the FBI. He may have said some reassuring things during his confirmation hearing, but I don't believe him. The president has made a disappointing choice in Kash Patel. Now, it's up to the Senate to decide whether to confirm him or not. Kash Patel's goal is to dismantle the FBI. We are determined to do everything we can to stop him and save this institution. Laurel, the FBI is really suffering in the eyes of the public. I noted, for me, it was quite the spectacle to see Adam Schiff questioning Kash Patel. I would struggle to think of anyone with more political bias than Schiff. And yet, Patel treated Schiff with a level of fairness that Schiff never extended to him. What do you think of Patel's nomination and his role at the Bureau? Well, first off, Lee responded, he has extensive security experience. Second, he will shift the FBI's focus away from Washington, D.C., and back into the field offices across America. Trey, as a former federal prosecutor, you know the FBI plays a crucial role in investigating and prosecuting crimes like cybercrime, organized crime, and terrorism. These are areas where the Bureau excels. And Patel has made it clear that he wants law enforcement officers to do what they do best, fight crime and keep our communities safe. He is also deeply committed to transparency and depoliticizing the FBI. These are precisely the qualities we need in an FBI director. I believe he will be a fantastic leader. He and Pam Bondi, working together, will ensure that our justice agencies are committed to fairness, equality, and the rule of law. And yet, I said, the Senate continues to delay his confirmation. What do you make of that? The Senate needs to stop dragging its feet and confirm him. We cannot afford to waste time on political games. We need strong leadership at the FBI. And Patel is the right person for the job. You were a judge, which is an incredibly difficult role. It requires restraint and humility. A judge is a referee, not a combatant. I think Senator Kennedy was right. Human nature is to repay injustice with injustice. But our system is designed to restrain human nature, not unleash it. How do we restore fairness as a universal virtue? Yes. And that is precisely the purpose of our justice system, fairness and impartiality. Lee replied, it is critical for the American people to trust that justice will be applied equally. The Department of Justice is one of the most vital institutions in our nation. We must restore faith in its ability to uphold the law fairly and consistently. That is why President Trump and his nominees have repeatedly emphasized not retribution, but fairness. Treating everyone equally, whether they are a friend or an adversary, is exactly what is long overdue in this country. As a judge, that is what we aimed to do every single day. It didn't matter who the person was or where they came from. The law applied to them the same as it did to everyone else. That is how our nation was designed to function. And I am incredibly optimistic about the commitment of these nominees and our president in restoring fairness and equal justice under the law. Laurel Lee, you were an outstanding judge. And you were an incredibly effective member of the House of Representatives. Florida is lucky to have you. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday night. Great to see you. Trey. Yes, ma'am, you too. Who goes first? House and Senate Republicans are debating the order of priority and why it matters. Congressman Marlin Stutzman joins us next. The question of legislative strategy is now front and center. With the new Republican-controlled Congress, there's an ongoing debate about which initiatives should be prioritized. Should tax reform come first? Immigration policy? Government spending cuts? Border security? Congressman Marlin Stutzman, a conservative leader and advocate for limited government, weighed in on the discussion. Trey, this is a critical moment for our party and for the country. Stutzman began, we have a mandate from the American people to get things done. And we cannot afford to waste time. The challenge is determining which policies to address first. Many believe tax reform should take precedence. I said, what do you think? Tax reform is certainly a priority. He agreed. Lowering taxes and simplifying the tax code will benefit businesses and working families alike. However, I also believe securing our border and addressing illegal immigration must be at the top of the list. We have a crisis that cannot be ignored. That brings up an interesting point. I added, some argue that cutting government spending should come before anything else. Absolutely. Stutzman nodded. Spending is out of control. And if we don't rein it in now, we may never get another chance. The deficit is growing at an alarming rate. We have to act decisively. But how do we balance these priorities? I asked. With so many issues competing for attention, how do you choose which one comes first? It's about strategic timing. Stutzman explained. Some issues, like border security, require immediate action. Others, like tax reform, can be phased in over time. We need to work efficiently and ensure that we are making real, tangible progress. So, what's the message to the American people? I asked. The message is simple. Stutzman said firmly. We are here to serve the American people, not the Washington establishment. We will fight for policies that promote economic growth, protect our borders, and reduce government overreach. We will not waste time on political games. We are here to deliver results. Congressman Marlin Stutzman, thank you for your time and insights tonight. Thank you, Trey. The key takeaway from the discussion above is the importance of fairness, accountability, and decisive action in both governance and personal life. Just as a nation thrives when its leaders uphold integrity and enforce laws impartially, individuals succeed when they commit to personal responsibility and principled decision-making. In a world filled with political noise and shifting priorities, staying true to core values, fairness, transparency, and resilience, ensures long-term success. Instead of reacting emotionally to injustices, focus on constructive solutions. Whether in politics or daily life, lasting change comes not from vengeance or empty promises, but from steadfast commitment to justice and truth.